The case of Peyton Lutner Morgan Geyser is seen as different at school because of her passion for horror stories. She spent her time on special websites and wrote creepy tales in her diary, which left her without friends. Other kids didn't want to befriend her, and she didn't make an effort to connect with them. In 4th grade, she befriended a kind girl named Anissa, and that was her first best friend. Initially, Anissa wasn't interested in being friends with Morgan. However, Morgan was thrilled to finally have a friend, and they started spending a lot of time together. In October 2013, they met another girl named Peyton, and the three of them became friends at school. Anissa was a typical student who did well academically and was favored by teachers, leading many classmates to seek her help with homework. Despite their friendship, Peyton and Morgan often clashed. Morgan found Peyton aggressive and unpleasant, while Peyton felt similarly about Morgan. Then Morgan and Anissa grew very close due to their shared love of horror stories. However, Peyton didn't like that. She mentioned her concerns to her parents, and they advised her to stay away from friends who were obsessed with horror stories. They believed that Morgan and Anissa were a bad influence on Peyton. Despite her parents' warnings, Peyton chose to stay in touch with Morgan and Anissa, unaware of the danger that was about to unfold. On May 31, 2014, Morgan, Anissa, and Peyton went to the park for a picnic to celebrate Morgan's 12th birthday. Later, a cyclist found Peyton bleeding and called 911. An ambulance rushed her to the hospital and doctors worked hard to save her life. Peyton had suffered 19 stab wounds to her arms, legs, and torso. The police launched an investigation into the brutal attack and determined that she had been in the park that day with Morgan and Anissa. Morgan and Anissa were all 12 years old, just like Peyton. Because of their age, the police tried to question them gently to avoid causing any trauma. Morgan was sweet and answered the questions calmly and honestly. She inquired about Peyton's condition and whether she was dead. When the investigator asked why Morgan had hurt her best friend, Morgan replied that it was necessary. She shared that the crime had been premeditated. 6 months prior, they had planned it carefully, but they couldn't do it until May 31st. On that day, they played video games, dressed up, and had fun, then prepared to go to the park. Peyton noticed that Morgan had packed a backpack for the trip, which contained clothes and granola bars. When Peyton asked why they needed supplies, Morgan said it was in case they wanted a snack. And in the backpack, there were also pictures of Anissa's parents and Morgan's parents. They took these photos with them because they weren't sure if they would be able to return home. No one witnessed Anissa putting a knife in the bag. The group first played on the playground, then went to the restroom. While there, Anissa and Morgan whispered to each other. Then, Anissa told Peyton to go into a stall, although Peyton was confused about why. Anissa and Morgan had a different motive. They believed it was easier to harm someone in a dream since a person doesn't resist, making the act simpler. They pushed Peyton into a stall and backed her into a corner. Morgan reminded Anissa of their agreement that she would be the one to perform the act. They hit Peyton's head against the wall and then stepped out of the stall to plan their next move. They returned to Peyton and suggested playing hide and seek, with Morgan being the seeker. Anissa instructed Peyton to lie down in the bushes to hide, which was actually their intention all along. They began to push Peyton down, and Anissa gestured to Morgan for her to lie flat. Morgan then signaled that Anissa should stab her. Anissa knocked Peyton down to the ground, and then Morgan rushed over and tried to take charge. Morgan insisted she could handle it alone, claiming she knew the weak points to attack because she had watched the movie Doomsday. However, Anissa would not agree, and they started arguing about who was going to kill Peyton. Morgan believed Peyton was too distracted by the flowers to hear their conversation. In that moment, Anissa stabbed Peyton with a knife and then handed the weapon to Morgan. Morgan then jumped on Peyton and began to stab her repeatedly. Anissa stepped back to watch as Morgan continued, and afterward, Morgan walked away from the scene covered in blood. In distress, Peyton screamed that she had trusted them and that she hated them. Anissa simply told her to lie down quietly. Peyton tried to stand up but was unsuccessful. She fell down and said she couldn't breathe and couldn't see clearly. In distress, she begged Anissa and Morgan for help. Morgan approached her and attempted to clean the blood off her body with leaves, but it was ineffective. Peyton asked Morgan not to touch her. They pretended to go for assistance, but actually ran away, leaving her there to die. They went to a Walmart, where they entered the restroom to wash the blood off their hands and tried to remove the stains from their clothes, but they were unsuccessful. During questioning, Morgan expressed uncertainty about whether she wanted to see her parents, which might indicate issues at home. Morgan revealed that Anissa had convinced her that Peyton needed to be killed to appease the fictional character Slender Man. Otherwise, he would harm their families, and they felt compelled to act. Morgan admitted that she understood what they were doing, but she didn't want to upset Anissa. Slender Man is a fictional character, tall and faceless, known for abducting children. Morgan and Anissa were obsessed with him and wanted to be his assistants, believing they could prove his existence. They fantasized about living in his mansion in the forest, not realizing he was just a made-up character. They were convinced that they had seen him in real life. Anissa was very emotional during the interrogation, struggling to hold back her tears. She explained that both she and Morgan heard voices, which led them to commit their actions. Anissa stated that in December 2013, Morgan suggested they become assistants to Slender Man, and Anissa agreed. Morgan claimed she made a deal with Slender Man, asserting that they needed to kill Peyton to avoid him coming after them and their families. For this reason, they were forced to kill their friend, Peyton. They talked about the case on the bus ride to school, discussing it in whispers so as not to be overheard. They were aware that their plan was dangerous. Anissa mentioned that Morgan brought a knife, which she tucked into her belt under her sweatshirt. This contradicted Morgan's own account, which said the knife was in Anissa's backpack. According to Anissa, all the stabs were performed by Morgan, insisting she did not participate because she considered herself a good person and was too squeamish about blood. However, her clothes had blood stains, making her statement seem unconvincing. They exchanged blame for the incident. After leaving Walmart, they walked to a national park in Wisconsin, believing that Slender Man lived there. Anissa claimed to have seen him. She described him as a tall man in a suit with no face, just a white mask. Anissa said that on the way, they argued because they felt guilty towards Peyton, whom they left behind in the woods. They began arguing about their actions. They realized that returning home would lead to their arrest. Anissa regretted the incident, while Morgan remained calm and unrepentant during the interrogation. When questioned, they revealed that they had initially planned to kill Peyton while she was sleeping to avoid facing her. They considered taping her mouth to prevent her from screaming and then running away, but ultimately decided against it because they didn't want to involve their families. After the police placed Anissa and Morgan on the wanted list, a passing driver spotted them and reported their location. Consequently, they were apprehended just 30 minutes after Peyton was found in the forest. In a backpack belonging to them, authorities discovered bars, a diary, photos of their families, and a knife with blood on it. A search of their computers and phones revealed that Morgan had looked up phrases like how to hide a murder, guilt for murder, what happens if get caught for murder, and can you be arrested for murder in self-defense. This evidence indicated that they had planned the crime and researched how to execute it. During the investigation, it was discovered that a student had informed the school counselor about overhearing Anissa discussing her desire to become Slender Man's assistant, which involved killing someone. The school counselor reportedly did not investigate this incident. The police located the counselor, and she denied these allegations. Several classmates told the police that Anissa had invited them to join her plan and suggested killing a friend. However, at the time, they did not pay attention and did not report this. They now felt guilty for not reporting her to the authorities sooner. On Anissa's phone, a breakup message was saved in the archive, with a dispatch date of May 28th. The message said that her final wish for those who cared about her was not to be saddened by her absence. She expressed that she loved them and would not harm them. She wished for all her belongings to go to her parents and sent her best wishes to everyone who knew her. In school lockers, drawings depicting bloody characters, knives, and Slender Man were discovered. After realizing Anissa and Morgan had abandoned her and no one was coming to help, Peyton didn't give up. She used all her strength to crawl out onto the road to seek help, and eventually, a cyclist discovered her. Due to the intense pain, she could not speak and could only nod. She was nearly unconscious. She suffered life-threatening injuries, including one just a few millimeters from her heart. Then she was taken to intensive care and doctors managed to save her life. Once she regained consciousness, she underwent a long recovery process, both mentally and physically. She often has nightmares about her friends and is always in a state of anxiety. She recalled that before stabbing her, Morgan expressed regret, stating that this was the only way to save her from Slender Man, who was supposedly stalking her. Morgan's parents and Anissa's parents were aware that their daughters were interested in Slender Man and other horror-themed characters, but they did not see any issues with this interest. However, they were unaware of the deep fear their daughters had about Slender Man, so they took no action. Teachers characterized Morgan as a peculiar, quiet girl who preferred to be alone, and her classmates often chose to avoid her. One day, Morgan ran through the school claiming that Snape from Harry Potter was stalking her, but others dismissed it as just a fantasy. On another occasion, students saw her in the bathroom with blood on her fingers, which was alarming. A teacher reported this to Morgan's mother, who responded that her daughter had simply been watching too many scary stories. The teacher then advised Morgan to stop watching horror tales, but she ignored this advice. Later, she brought a hammer to school, which was noticed when it fell out of her locker. When she was called to the principal's office, Morgan claimed she needed the hammer. Morgan's mother was notified by the teacher about her daughter's concerning behavior, but she didn't take the issue seriously. Morgan's classmates noticed that she carried a diary in which she wrote her thoughts, including unsettling content about death, that frightened them. The teacher raised the matter with her mother again, but she dismissed it. 12-year-old Morgan Geyser and her friend Anissa were charged with attempted first-degree murder. During the trial, Anissa said she felt the situation was not serious, thinking that she and Morgan were merely playing a game. She didn't understand the gravity of their actions until Morgan began to stab Peyton. Anissa stated that she didn't intend to hurt anyone. Her goal was to prove the existence of Slender Man and find different ways to do so. They were scared that if they didn't go through with their plan, Slender Man would come after them, which drove their actions. Anissa and Morgan felt deep remorse for their actions. Morgan was diagnosed with early-stage schizophrenia, a condition that was later determined to be hereditary, as her father also had the illness. She pleaded guilty, but under a plea agreement, she was found not guilty by reason of mental illness. Consequently, she was sentenced to 40 years of treatment in a psychiatric hospital. Anissa also pleaded guilty to being an accomplice in attempted premeditated murder. However, the jury found her not guilty due to mental illness, concluding that she could not differentiate between reality and her fantasies. She received a sentence of 25 years of treatment in a psychiatric hospital. In the summer of 2021, the court approved Anissa's request for early release after doctors confirmed that she no longer posed a threat to herself or others. On September 13, 2021, 19-year-old Anissa was released from the psychiatric hospital. She now lives with her parents and intends to continue her education and seek a part-time job. Anissa is under constant GPS surveillance and her internet activity is monitored to prevent her from visiting horror story websites. Additionally, she is prohibited from consuming alcohol, using drugs, possessing weapons, and contacting Peyton and her family. Peyton is now 19 years old. She has graduated from school and enrolled in university to study medicine. Although she currently has no friends, she is dating a guy. Janelle Patton was born on June 30, 1972, in Sydney, Australia. She was an only child, and her parents lavished all their love and attention on her. From a very young age, Janelle developed a passion for music. She played both the piano and clarinet and was active in her school's music group. After finishing high school, Janelle went to university to study medicine. But after just a year, she decided to drop out and focus on her career. She got a job at a bank and spent the next few years working her way up. Over time, though, Janelle started feeling that big city life, with all of its challenges and stresses, was taking a toll on her, and she began thinking about moving somewhere quieter. In October 1999, at 27 years old, Janelle decided to move to a small island called Norfolk. The island was nearly 1,000 miles from Australia. Back then, Norfolk had its own custom regulations and local laws, making it pretty independent from the mainland, but it was still considered part of the country. With a population of around 2,000, everyone in Norfolk knew each other, and because it was so isolated, new faces were rare except for tourists. The island was a popular spot for visitors from both Australia and New Zealand, which was a bit closer. Janelle quickly found a job at a local hotel, got to know the island's residents, and eventually settled into their laid-back way of life. Norfolk felt like a small town, but with the added isolation of being surrounded by nothing but ocean for hundreds of miles. Because of that, locals really tried to get along. After all, they didn't have much choice. In late March 2002, a year and a half after moving, Janelle's parents decided to visit her for the first time, and she was really excited. They arrived on March 30th, and Janelle spent the whole day showing them around, introducing them to the island's main sites and the locals. The next day, Janelle had a morning shift at the hotel, so they planned to meet up as soon as she finished work. She had rented a small cottage on the property of a local woman, but it wasn't big enough to fit her parents, so she booked them a room at a hotel. That morning, Janelle finished her shift around 11 a.m. and set off on her daily walk, something she did regularly. Her route was a short loop from her house to a lookout point at the edge of the island. Her parents expected her to stop by their hotel around noon, but Janelle was running late. At first, they figured she might have gotten caught up with something, so they decided to go for a walk themselves. Before they left, they wrote her a note and stuck it in the door, but when they got back around 2:30 p.m., the note was still there. Realizing that Janelle hadn't come by as planned, her parents started to worry. They tried calling her, but she didn't pick up. It was strange. How could their daughter disappear on such a small island? The thought that something might have happened to her began to creep in. They went to her cottage and found the front door unlocked. But on Norfolk, that wasn't unusual. People rarely locked their doors as crime was practically unheard of on the island. Inside, there was no sign of Janelle and nothing suggested that anything bad had happened. Her car was also parked outside. While they were at the house, one of Janelle's friends showed up. When they told her they hadn't been able to reach Janelle all day, she suggested they check the route Janelle usually took for her daily walk. The three of them drove along the path, but there was no sign of her. After that, her parents returned to the hotel and informed the manager about what was going on. He made a few calls to people around the island, asking if anyone had seen Janelle, but no one had. By then, it was around 8 p.m., and her parents decided it was time to call the police. They explained that their daughter had been missing all day, and the officers asked them to come down to the station. The police informed Janelle's parents that just an hour before their call, a tourist from New Zealand had discovered a body near a waterfall. She had spotted a large black bag and, upon getting closer, saw human hands sticking out from underneath it. When officers arrived at the scene, they found a woman's body showing multiple visible injuries, and her clothes were partly missing. As Janelle's parents were speaking with the police, the officers had just begun processing the crime scene. They immediately suspected that the victim could be Janelle. To spare her parents from the trauma of identifying the body, the investigators asked Janelle's neighbor, the woman she rented the cottage from, to come to the scene. When she arrived, she immediately confirmed that the victim was indeed Janelle. The body was handed over to the medical examiners, but based on the initial assessment, it was clear that they were likely dealing with a murder. The news sent shockwaves through the island community. There hadn't been a murder on Norfolk since 1893, and even minor crimes were rare. The local police were used to handling nothing more serious than fights and domestic disputes, but now they were faced with a homicide investigation. Because of this, they decided to request assistance from Australian investigators, who immediately flew to the island. The medical examiners found 64 injuries on Janelle's body, including bruises and cuts likely caused by a sharp object, possibly broken glass. Supporting this theory, they found glass shards in her hair, which they believed came from a broken bottle. In addition to the cuts, there were bruises on her wrists, suggesting someone had held her down while she was being attacked. This led the investigators to consider that there may have been more than one person involved in the murder. Alongside the cuts from the glass, there were also stab wounds, indicating a knife had been used in the attack as well. Forensic experts found microscopic traces of green and white paint on Janelle's body. These particles were also present on her clothing and in her hair. The experts believed that the paint might have come from the perpetrator or their vehicle, possibly during the disposal of her body. Although part of Janelle's clothing was missing, which initially pointed to a possible sexual motive, the forensic team found no signs of sexual assault. However, they did recover a foreign DNA sample from her body, but it belonged to an unidentified female. The investigation was further complicated by the fact that around 3:30 p.m. on the day of the murder, a brief but intense rainstorm swept across the island. This downpour may have washed away crucial evidence, such as footprints, blood, or other biological samples. However, the rain did help establish a timeline. There were puddles in the black plastic sheet covering Janelle's body, indicating that it had been left there before the rain started. This meant that Janelle had likely been dead and lying there for at least 3 hours before she was discovered. While the forensic experts were busy searching for clues, the police began piecing together the final hours of Janelle's life. They discovered that after finishing her shift, Janelle stopped by a store before heading home. Around the same time, her landlord arrived and saw Janelle leaving for her usual walk. About 10 minutes later, another local resident drove past Janelle on the road. The next person to see her lived near the end of that route and spotted Janelle standing next to a white car talking to the driver. According to the witness, she thought there were 2 men in the car, but admitted it was possible there could have been only one. 5 minutes later, 2 more witnesses who lived close to the road reported hearing what sounded like a child crying in the distance. Another man said he heard a scream, but by the time he went outside to check, the noise had stopped. Based on this information, the police concluded that the attack on Janelle likely took place around 11:45 a.m., just half an hour after she had finished her shift. With no strong leads, the police sent the black plastic sheet that Janelle's body had been wrapped in to the mainland for more advanced testing. Sometime later, the results came back. Forensic experts had found 10 different fingerprints on the sheet, but all of them were partially smeared. Despite this, the detectives decided to try matching the prints. They compiled a list of everyone who had been on the island the day of the murder, which amounted to more than 2,700 names, including both locals and tourists. The police asked all individuals between the ages of 15 and 70 to voluntarily provide fingerprints and DNA samples, but only half complied. Out of 1,300 sets of fingerprints, the experts couldn't find a single match. With no results from the prints, the investigators decided to shift their focus to potential suspects among Janelle's acquaintances. Her diary proved to be a key source of information. It contained detailed entries about life on the island and her relationships with its residents. From the diary, police learned that Janelle had a strained relationship with one of her friends. When Janelle first moved to the island, this woman helped her find a temporary place to live at her friend's house. However, Janelle didn't stay there long, apparently due to some disagreements. But even after Janelle moved out, this man continued to act suspiciously. Several witnesses reported that he had once threatened Janelle in the middle of the street. Police also discovered that after her body was found, he asked a friend to provide him with an alibi and say that they spent the day together, even though it wasn't true. The reason behind his behavior remained unclear, but the police uncovered an interesting detail. It appeared that he was in a secret relationship with Janelle's friend, the one who had helped her with housing, despite the fact that the woman was married with children. Janelle had written about their affair in her diary, and it was possible that the couple wasn't happy she knew about their secret. Despite this, both the man and the woman provided their fingerprints, and neither matched those found on the plastic sheet. The police also searched their homes and cars, but found no incriminating evidence. The next suspect the police looked into was a man Janelle had been dating for 9 months. He was investigated for possible involvement, but once again, the police couldn't find any evidence linking him to the crime. Janelle's diary also mentions several other people with whom she had tense relationships, but all of them agreed to provide their fingerprints and DNA samples, and none of them matched. At one point, the police even considered Janelle's parents as suspects, since the murder occurred the day after they arrived on the island, but this theory also led nowhere. Eventually, the investigation hit a dead end. For months, the police tried to identify new suspects and re-examine the existing evidence, but every lead turned into a dead end. They even announced a substantial reward of $300,000 for information about the case, but none of the tips brought them any closer to finding the killer. 2 years later, investigators reopened the case and decided to re-examine the fingerprint samples they had collected from locals and tourists. This time, they also included prints from suspects in other recent cases on the island. Since all the prints were stored on paper, experts had to compare them manually. The process took a while, but eventually detectives got a breakthrough call. The fingerprints of a suspect in another case matched 2 prints found on the black tarp used to wrap Janelle's body. That suspect was 26-year-old Glenn McNeil. Shortly after Janelle's murder, police had questioned him in connection with a home invasion, but he wasn't arrested. Despite this, they had taken his fingerprints, which had been stored with the case file ever since. Police also learned that in 2002, McNeil owned a white Honda, matching the description of the car a witness saw near Janelle just minutes before her death. Another curious fact was that McNeil had left the island shortly after the murder. He had moved to Norfolk from New Zealand in 2000 with his wife and worked as a chef, but they later divorced, which also happened around the time of his move from the island. At the time of the investigation, McNeil was living in New Zealand with his new wife and 2 children, which made it difficult for the police to question him. However, they realized that he likely hadn't taken his car off the island, so they decided to search for it, hoping forensic experts could examine it for evidence. Before long, they found it. The white Honda had been abandoned on someone's property, not far from his old house, overgrown with weeds. It was handed over to forensics, and investigators got a warrant to search the house where McNeil had lived during his time on the island. When the experts thoroughly examined the car, they discovered traces of white and green paint that matched the paint particles found on Janelle's body. There were also a few glass shards, and similar fragments were found in his former home. An expert was called in to analyze the samples, and he confirmed that the glass shards from the car, the house, and the ones found on Janelle's clothes and body not only matched but were produced at the same time for a specific type of product. He also discovered parts of an engraving on one of the shards, which turned out to be the name of a wine. This confirmed that all 3 sets of glass shards came from the same wine bottle. In the backyard of McNeil's former house, the police found a black tarp exactly like the one used to wrap Janelle's body. They also discovered several human hairs and some biological traces in the trunk of his car. But unfortunately, both pieces of evidence had deteriorated over time, so the experts couldn't extract any DNA. Not giving up, detectives sent the hairs to a lab in the US, which had the most advanced technology at the time. But the process dragged on for a year. The first lab was overloaded and couldn't get to it right away. In the end, one of the detectives had to fly to the US to hand the samples to a different lab. Finally, in early 2006, the police got the result they were looking for. The hairs were confirmed to belong to Janelle. With all this evidence coming together, detectives secured an arrest warrant and headed to New Zealand to take McNeil into custody. He was then extradited to Australia, where he was officially charged with Janelle's murder. During the first interrogation, McNeil, to the surprise of the detectives, started confessing right away. He claimed that, on the morning of the murder, he smoked some weed and went for a drive around the island. At some point, he bent down to grab a pack of cigarettes, lost sight of the road, and hit something. At first, McNeil thought he'd run over an animal, but when he got out of the car, he saw a person lying underneath it. Panicking, he loaded the body into his trunk and drove home, where he spent hours using drugs. A while later, he started hearing noises coming from the trunk and realized the woman was still alive. That's when he grabbed a kitchen knife, opened the trunk, and stabbed her multiple times. After that, McNeil wrapped the body in a tarp and dumped it near the waterfall. Despite his confession, detectives knew immediately he was lying. Almost everything he said didn't match the facts. Medical examiners were sure the injuries Janelle didn't line up with being hit by a car. Plus, McNeil's story didn't explain the bruises on her wrist, the cuts from glass shards, and why part of her clothing had been removed. And if he really had stabbed her in the trunk, there would have been blood traces there, something the forensic team would never have missed. But there were none. The police tried to get him to tell the truth, pointing out all the inconsistencies, but McNeil stubbornly stuck to his version. In the end, the case went to trial, which began in the summer of 2006. It was held on the island, and the jury was selected from the local residents. At the first hearing, McNeil claimed he had nothing to do with the murder, and even said he didn't remember giving any confession to the police. He blamed his memory lapse on supposed mental health issues, although there was no medical proof to back up his claims. But by the time the trial began, the detectives had dug up something interesting. They knew McNeil's defense team would focus on the fact that female DNA was found on Janelle's body. It wasn't just on her clothes. It was also under her fingernails, which suggested she might have scratched a woman in a struggle before she died. This raised the possibility that a woman was involved in the murder and could have jeopardized the whole case. After McNeil's arrest, the investigators questioned everyone who knew Janelle, asking if there was any connection between her and McNeil. One of her friends remembered something odd. Just 2 or 3 weeks before Janelle's death, she had asked her friend if she knew a woman named Alicia and her husband, Glenn McNeil. The friend replied that she didn't know them personally but had seen them around. Janelle didn't explain why she asked that and just changed the subject. This same friend also mentioned that on the day of the murder, she was working at a hotel and spotted Alicia outside acting weird. Alicia was covered in something red, and when the friend asked if everything was okay, Alicia, who seemed a bit shaken, simply said it was just paint and walked away. For some reason, the witness didn't think to tell the police about this at the time. She didn't realize it could be connected to Janelle's murder until detectives asked her about McNeil and his wife. Alicia was called to testify in court but insisted she had nothing to do with the murder. We still don't know if the police compared her DNA with the female sample from Janelle's body. Interestingly, later on, Janelle's friend changed her testimony and claimed that a religious cult of 6 people was behind her murder. This revelation shocked investigators, casting doubt on all of her previous statements. As for McNeil, he continued to deny any involvement in the murder, still insisting he didn't remember confessing. But despite his claims, with all the evidence presented, the jury found him guilty. On March 9, 2007, he was sentenced to 24 years in prison. Even though the case seemed closed, many people continued to question whether McNeil was truly the killer. The most popular theory, based on witness statements and the nature of the injuries, suggested that he may not have acted alone. Either he killed Janelle with someone else or helped someone dispose of her body. A few years after the trial, McNeil suddenly claimed he knew who really killed Janelle. According to his new story, it was a man who had been selling him drugs. McNeil said that on the morning of the murder, he was at home when this man and his wife showed up. The man told him there was a body in his trunk and ordered McNeil to get rid of it, threatening to harm him and his wife if he didn't comply. Scared for his life, McNeil did as he was told. He moved the body into his own car, wrapped it in a tarp, and took it to the waterfall. He also claimed he wore medical gloves while doing this, but the detectives quickly pointed out a flaw in his story. There were several of his fingerprints on the tarp, which wouldn't have been there if he had used gloves. Plus, he claimed he buried the gloves in his yard, but when police dug up the area, they didn't find anything. McNeil also named the man he claimed killed Janelle, and this guy was indeed suspected of selling illegal substances. When police checked McNeil's phone records, they found he had been in regular contact with him. However, this only suggested that McNeil was buying drugs from him, not that the man was involved in the murder. In the following years, several more theories about this case emerged, each one more dubious and contradictory than the last. Some media even suggested that Janelle was a secret police informant, claiming that could have been the real motive for her murder. But no solid evidence was ever found to support this theory or any of the others. On February 1, 2024, McNeil was released from prison early and deported back to New Zealand. He will remain under supervision while on probation, but technically he is now a free man. Throughout all these years, McNeil has stuck to his story that other people were responsible for the murder. Maybe one day he'll change his story again and we will finally learn the truth. But until then, this case remains filled with unanswered questions. The case of Linda Loaiza. Linda Loaiza was born on December 12, 1982, in La Victoria, a city in the state of Mérida, Venezuela. She grew up in a modest family and had 10 siblings. From an early age, she developed a strong interest in animals and often helped her parents with their livestock business. This passion prompted her to enroll in an agricultural engineering school. On February 27, 2001, she moved to Caracas, the capital of Venezuela, to pursue a degree in veterinary medicine. However, no one, including Linda and her family, could have predicted the unexpected turn her life would take. On the morning of March 27, 2001, she was kidnapped by Luis Carrera Almoina. Luis's family was one of the most prominent intellectual and political families in Venezuela. He is the second son of Gustavo Carrera, a renowned researcher, writer, and university professor who was a member of the Venezuelan Language Institute and a former rector of the National Open University. Luis's uncle is a notable intellectual and academic figure in Venezuela. His family is very influential, with many members involved in the Communist Party of Venezuela. Luis's mother, who died in 2000, was also a talented researcher, writer, and professor at the Faculty of Humanities and Education at the Central University of Venezuela. Luis's aunt, along with his sister, had close ties to the government during the Chavez era and were involved in promoting cultural ties linked to socialism. Luis is considered an agricultural engineer and rancher, and he is the son of a school principal from the upper class. However, in reality, he has no stable job or permanent residence. Instead, he relies on his father's financial support and reputation. As a young man, Luis attended a private high school in a wealthy area of eastern Caracas and spent some time living in France. Those who knew him often described him as sociable and self-promoting. On March 27th, Luis, then 36, kidnapped 18-year-old Linda at gunpoint. The next morning, Cecilia Lopez noticed that her sister had not returned home. The sisters lived together and were both planning to move to the capital for college. Concerned, Ana reported Linda's disappearance to the police, but they told her it was too early to start looking for her. Shortly thereafter, a stranger called Anna and said her sister would not be returning. When Anna tried to call back, she reached an answering machine. Turned out that Luis, the kidnapper, had made the call. Anna went to the police at least 6 times, but they did not file a complaint or take any action. Instead, they reassured her that Linda and Luis were likely in a romantic relationship and that it was best not to interfere. Occasionally called Anna to reassure her that Linda was fine and studying to pursue a modeling career. However, 2 months after the kidnapping, on May 26, 2001, Anna reported the incident to the police, who began an investigation. The police attempted to contact the owner of the phone number associated with the case, and left several messages urging him to voluntarily turn himself in. One morning in March, just weeks after arriving in Caracas, Linda left the building where she lived. She was carrying a thesis and some documents to submit to the Ministry of Education. The building, located at the end of a dead-end street, also contained a small bookstore, a bakery, and a hardware store. As she stepped outside, Luis approached her from behind, threatened her with a weapon, and dragged her into a burgundy-colored van. After putting Linda in the car, he drove to a hotel near the location where she was kidnapped. Linda was terrified immediately after the incident. He was much taller and stronger than she was, looked well-groomed, but acted aggressively and threatened her with a weapon throughout the trip. He warned her that any attempt to resist would result in her death. He arrived at a hotel. Before parking, he repeated that he would kill her if she screamed. He then put the weapon in his jacket pocket. When he checked in, the room he had booked was not ready, and he was told to wait for about an hour. Since the wait was taking too long, he decided to take Linda back to the car and drive to his father's apartment. Before going out into the street, he threatened Linda again. This time, he put his arm around her and walked with her from the parking lot. They passed 2 houses where everyone knew Luis, and he stopped to say hello and chat for a while. He told the women that Linda was his girlfriend. He made up a story that Linda had decided to move in with him, but she cried because she felt guilty about leaving her family. When they arrived at the apartment, He calmed down a bit and started packing various things into a black bag that he had prepared earlier. When he was done packing, they went back to the hotel to check in. After checking into the hotel, quickly inspected the room, looking at the doors, windows, curtains, and bathroom. Meanwhile, Linda noticed a door leading to the next room and considered using it to escape. However, Luis sensed her intentions and asked the hotel staff to change rooms. They were quickly moved to another room. Luis meticulously planned his actions. Inside the room, he made sure the security chains were fastened. The locks were secure. The TV was blaring loudly to drown out Linda's screams. The curtains were drawn tight, and he kept a weapon ready to intimidate her into submission. Linda later described her first night of captivity as terrifying and hopeless. For 112 days, Linda endured severe psychological, verbal, and physical abuse. The ordeal began in a hotel and continued in an apartment in eastern Caracas. Every day, Luis treated Linda like a slave, subjecting her to relentless abuse. On July 19, 2001, Luis left the apartment and forgot to handcuff Linda. She managed to use her remaining strength to reach the window and scream for help. Firefighters finally arrived and climbed onto the balcony to rescue her. When they entered the apartment, they witnessed a heartbreaking scene. The place was covered in trash, and Linda weighed only 32 kg. Although she was rescued, the memory of that moment still makes her extremely sad. Linda was severely injured, with bruises and broken bones in many places on her body. Her face and mouth were disfigured due to the abuse. Luis forced her to take drugs, gave her very little food, and kept her in poor living conditions. On the day of her rescue, there was a 5-hour delay between the arrival of the fire department and the time she was taken to the doctor. Linda's health was so critical that she could have died at any moment. During her captivity, her life was constantly in danger. After her rescue, she underwent 15 complex surgeries and was hospitalized for more than a year. Shocking photos of her condition appeared on the front pages of newspapers, highlighting the brutality of her situation. The community saw Luis as a monstrous figure and the embodiment of evil. However, Linda's real struggle was only just beginning. After enduring the abuse, she now faced another challenge: Luis's punishment. In an interview, Linda expressed that although her body bore many scars, the deepest pain was in her heart. This trauma is not only hers, but also symbolizes the pain of all women who have suffered abuse from men who have gone unpunished. Linda was probably not Luis's first or last victim. Although she escaped, his life remained unchanged as the police did not take action against him. Determined to seek justice, Linda chose to pursue a career in law. She earned a law degree and a master's degree in human rights. She repeatedly pointed out that Luis's socio-economic status had a significant impact on both the investigation and the court's decisions. While Linda was in custody, Luis repeatedly told her that his father's status and connections would protect him from punishment. Her family noted that in Linda's case, basic procedures such as taking photos of the crime scene, collecting evidence, and conducting a forensic examination were not carried out until 8 days later. These essential steps were initially overlooked. There was also the issue of her numerous health problems not being properly documented, along with other important details being omitted. All of this clearly worked against Linda and in favor of Luis. During a trial, Luis underwent a test to determine if he had any psychological or emotional disorders that could explain his behavior and actions. The test showed that Luis did not exhibit any signs of mental illness. In October 2004, Luis was tried for causing serious injury and false imprisonment, with the possibility of attempted murder still being considered. The defense argued that Linda was promiscuous and had consented to most of Luis's actions. The judge then dismissed all charges against Luis Carrera Almoina. Linda felt she had no choice but to appeal to international judges. As a result, her case was heard by over 90 judges and dozens of prosecutors, but justice was still not served. In 2007, Linda appealed to the United States Commission on Human Rights. In the following years, the commission held approximately 3 hearings related to her case. In 2015, the commission's chairman allowed Linda to speak for 10 minutes. In her testimony, Linda recounted the horrors she endured at the hands of Luis and how she tried to call for help from those nearby. She also described the moment she was rescued and reflected on her long struggle for justice. Linda's representative urged the United States Commission on Human Rights to thoroughly evaluate the case, highlighting the flaws in the investigation. The commission recommended that Venezuela conduct a comprehensive and timely investigation into the violence involving Linda in accordance with the procedures outlined by the Inter-American Court of Human Rights. Furthermore, the commission recommended that the state take appropriate disciplinary and criminal action against public officials whose actions or inactions resulted in a failure to deliver justice. The final recommendation was to examine the systems in Venezuela that could prevent a recurrence of past events, focusing on measures to ensure that women victims have access to justice. A national policy to prevent violence against women began to take shape with effective monitoring and control mechanisms. In 2018, the Inter-American Court of Human Rights condemned the Venezuelan government for numerous human rights violations against Linda and her family. The state has not complied with the U.S. court ruling. Linda has been persistent in her efforts to ensure that regulations protecting women, girls, and adolescents are enforced. She has vowed to continue fighting until the state meets her demands. Linda was kidnapped for 112 days by Luis, a member of a prominent Venezuelan family who remains at large and unidentified. Linda often emphasizes her age at the time of her kidnapping, as if trying to stress that she was too young to have endured such trauma. Even after more than 20 years, she remains committed to her fight. Linda seeks justice not only for herself, but for all women who have suffered violence. Through her activism, she aims to ensure that no one else has to endure the nightmare she experienced. Valerie Tindle was born on August 29, 2005 in Indianapolis, Indiana. She had a big, loving family, her parents, a brother, and 4 sisters. At some point, they decided to leave the big city and move to a tiny town called Arlington, about an hour's drive from Indianapolis. With only a few hundred residents, Arlington was a quiet, peaceful, and safe place. Valerie enrolled in the local school, made friends, and grew to love the small-town life. As a teenager, she started taking on various part-time jobs to earn her first paycheck. She initially worked at local restaurants before landing a job with a lawn mowing company. This job was perfect for her. It had a flexible schedule that fit well with her school hours, and operating a lawn mower didn't require any special skills or much effort. By 2023, when Valerie was 17, she was working hard to get good grades so she could get into a college to become a veterinarian. She had loved animals since childhood and had long dreams of becoming a vet. That summer, during her school break, she was busy researching colleges and continued mowing lawns to save up as much money as she could before heading off to college. On June 7th, Valerie told her parents she was heading to work, said goodbye, and left. Her mom expected her to be home in a few hours. As the day went on, it became clear that something was wrong. Valerie wasn't answering her phone, and as evening approached, her mom decided to call her boss. Valerie worked for a neighbor and family friend, Patrick. To her surprise, Patrick told her that not only had Valerie not shown up for work, but she didn't even have a shift scheduled that day. This news made Valerie's parents even more worried. They feared something bad might have happened, but held on to hope. Her mom considered the possibility that Valerie might have lied about going to work and instead spent the day with friends, even though she'd never done anything like that before. In the end, they decided to wait, hoping their daughter would come home soon. They also called everyone she knew, but no one had seen her that day. So by the next morning, when Valerie still hadn't returned, they decided it was time to call the police. After speaking with Valerie's parents, the police considered the possibility that she might have gone somewhere secretly or even run away from home. Her mom mentioned that Valerie usually didn't work on Wednesdays, but she assumed her daughter had just picked up an extra shift that day. The officers also talked to her boss, who confirmed that Valerie had no scheduled work that day and had last worked on Tuesday. The police questioned her friends and acquaintances, but none of them had seen Valerie or spent time with her. Given the small size of their town, the officers quickly interviewed everyone Valerie might have been with, but it led nowhere. The only lead they managed to find was a witness who saw Valerie driving by around noon on the day she disappeared. But unfortunately, this didn't bring them any closer to finding out where she was. As days passed without any sign of Valerie, the police became increasingly convinced that she wasn't going to return home on her own. Investigators began focusing on two main theories: that she had either run away or that foul play was involved. Valerie's parents were skeptical about the idea of her running away. There were no issues at home, and she had been working hard in school to achieve her dream of becoming a veterinarian. However, the thought of her running away still gave them a glimmer of hope that she was alive and safe, because the alternative was far worse. For several weeks, the police, along with Valerie's family and volunteers, searched tirelessly around their town. Authorities also asked local residents to help locate Valerie's car. The fact that no one had spotted her vehicle in the small town suggested that Valerie had driven it out of Arlington herself, or someone had hidden it. Nearly 3 weeks later, on June 26th, the police finally found Valerie's car parked at an apartment complex in Shelbyville, about 20 miles from Arlington. The license plates were missing and the doors were locked. There were no signs of a struggle or any useful clues inside the car, but detectives quickly uncovered an interesting detail. The apartment complex where the car was found was a client of the lawn mowing company where Valerie worked. Despite this, Valerie's boss, Patrick, had insisted she wasn't scheduled to work that day. The investigators began to suspect that he might be hiding something and started looking more closely at him. After interviewing residents in the area around the apartment complex, they found another witness who had seen Valerie on the day she disappeared. But she wasn't alone. Her boss, Patrick, was in the car with her. Hearing this, the detectives went to question Patrick. He stuck to his story, claiming he hadn't seen Valerie that day. But when the police informed him that a witness had placed him with Valerie and that her car had been found, his story suddenly changed. Patrick admitted that he had indeed seen Valerie that day. According to his new version of events, they met up in Shelbyville and Valerie asked him to drive her to a small town called Homer, a few miles from Arlington. She claimed she was planning to run away from home and that someone would be waiting for her there. Once they arrived, Valerie got out of his car and into another vehicle driven by an unknown man, and they drove off together. Patrick added that the next day, he picked up Valerie's car and left it in the parking lot of the apartment complex where the police later found it. He insisted that he was only trying to help her, but investigators quickly spotted inconsistencies in his story. They had already checked the location data from Valerie's phone, which showed that it had last been active in Arlington, not in any other town. This suggested that something might have happened to her in Arlington, and they confronted Patrick with this information. To their surprise, Patrick changed his story again. This time, he claimed that they met near the apartment complex in Shelbyville, after which Valerie got into his car and they drove to his house. He then left Valerie at his home alone when he went to work, and when he returned, she was gone. Naturally, the detectives found this version even less credible than his previous ones. They asked Patrick to hand over his phone, and he agreed. The detectives found text messages exchanged with Valerie on the day she disappeared. At 11:23 a.m., Valerie had sent him a message saying, "I'll be there soon," and a few hours later had replied, "Where are you?" He sent the same message again a little later, but there was no response. All of this raised serious suspicions, and the detectives were highly doubtful of Patrick's truthfulness. They decided to speak with Valerie's parents to ask if they had noticed anything unusual about Patrick's behavior. Valerie's mom shared that Patrick did sometimes act strangely. He had built a close friendship with Valerie, spending time with her outside of work, giving her gifts, and even taking her shopping. Sometimes, the 59-year-old man seemed to behave more like a jealous boyfriend than a boss. However, Valerie's mom didn't take these concerns too seriously. Patrick was a close family friend, and Valerie was friends with his daughter, so her mother assumed he was just being supportive. Yet, one particular incident stood out to her as especially suspicious. Patrick once invited Valerie to visit an aquarium in another city. Her parents allowed her to go, thinking that Patrick was taking his entire family, but they later found out that he went alone with Valerie, which her parents found quite odd. Valerie's mom also mentioned that on the night of June 7th, Patrick and his wife came over to visit their house, where he suggested that Valerie might have run away and might never come back. She also brought up one curious detail that caught the detective's attention. Patrick had been tracking Valerie's phone location through a special app. He claimed this was for work purposes, but the detectives immediately noticed something strange. If Patrick could simply open the app and see where Valerie was, why did he send her several messages asking, "Where are you?" on the day she disappeared? After piecing together all the information, the detectives were nearly convinced of Patrick's involvement in Valerie's disappearance. However, with only circumstantial evidence and no clear idea of Valerie's current whereabouts, they couldn't yet hold him accountable. Still, the police decided to arrest Patrick for providing false statements, as he had broken the law by lying about not seeing Valerie on the day she vanished. He was formally charged, and the police continued to think what to do next. This move was largely driven by the detectives' hope that after his arrest, Patrick might eventually tell them the truth, but he continued to insist that he had nothing to do with her disappearance. The next step was to obtain a warrant to search Patrick's home, but this process proved difficult. Without any solid evidence, it took several months. Eventually, the police uncovered another suspicious detail. Several of Patrick's neighbors reported that the day after Valerie disappeared, he dismantled and burned his garage in the middle of the night around 2 a.m. Finally, on October 11th, the police secured a warrant and went to search Patrick's property. His house sat on a vast piece of land with a pond in the middle. For search dogs immediately indicated that there was a sense of human remains coming from the water, so investigators focused their search there. However, no remains were found in the water. The experts suggested that a body might have been near the pond at some point, causing the scent to seep into the water. The police then expanded their search across the property. They requested a helicopter equipped with ground-penetrating radar, and from the data collected, they created a map highlighting areas with some signs of digging. Given the size of the property, the search extended for several weeks. This continued until November 28th, when the police focused their attention on a large pile of construction debris mixed with soil. After clearing the debris, they uncovered 2 wooden crates beneath it. The first contained old VHS tapes and documents, though the police have not yet disclosed their contents. In the second crate, they found human remains wrapped in black garbage bags. The level of decomposition made it impossible to visually identify the person. But the detectives noticed the nails of the deceased were painted in the same color as Valerie's on the day she disappeared. The remains were sent to medical examiners, who quickly confirmed that they belonged to Valerie Tindle. Following this confirmation, was charged with her murder, and the detectives brought him in for questioning. Now that Valerie's body had been found on his property, Patrick did not deny his involvement. However, his account once again raised serious doubts. According to his account, they met that day near the apartment complex in Shelbyville for work, after which they went to his home, where his office was also located. Patrick claimed that Valerie began to blackmail him. He insisted that she had been trying to seduce him for some time and that on that day she demanded a new car. If he didn't comply, she threatened to tell everyone he had seduced her, destroying his life. Patrick said he panicked and a heated argument ensued, escalating into a physical struggle. In the midst of this, he grabbed his belt and strangled Valerie. Afterward, he moved her body to his office and hid it there. The next day, he went to a store, purchased some wooden boards, and made 2 makeshift coffins. In one, he placed Valerie's body, and in the other, he stored documents and old videotapes. He also wrapped the body in garbage bags and duct tape to mask the odor of decomposition. Patrick then decided to hide the crates in a pit that was already on his property. But he needed something to cover them. So he used the construction debris, which was plenty on his land, and buried the coffins under a layer of soil to secure them. As for the burned garage, the purpose of his action remains unclear. Given that he burned it shortly after the murder and in the middle of the night, it likely has some connection to the crime. Perhaps he needed to destroy certain evidence, and the garage demolition was just a cover for the large fire. It's worth noting that the pit where he buried Valerie's body was only 100 yards from her parents' home, who had been searching for their daughter for almost 6 months. When police asked him how he felt after committing the murder, Patrick calmly stated that nothing in his life had really changed. Naturally, the detectives were skeptical of his entire story. It all seemed like Patrick was trying to portray himself as the victim, justifying his actions by claiming he was being blackmailed. A far more likely scenario was that Patrick had been ingratiating himself with Valerie for some time, hoping for a romantic relationship. On the day of the murder, he might have brought her to his home and attempted to initiate an intimate encounter. But when Valerie refused, he panicked at the thought she might tell her parents and decided to kill her. Another detail that cast doubt on Patrick's version of events was the testimony from Valerie's relatives. They mentioned that she loved her car and even said once that she wanted to drive it for the rest of her life. This made Patrick's story about being blackmailed for a new car seem even less believable. After charges were brought against Patrick, detectives uncovered several more intriguing pieces of evidence that further built the case against him. A thorough examination of his smartphone revealed that shortly after arriving home on the day of the murder, Patrick began deleting apps from his device. Although he failed to remove his health app, which recorded a significant spike in his heart rate for several minutes, shortly after his arrival. Investigators believe that this was the moment when he killed Valerie and moved her body. Patrick also admitted to disposing of the license plates from Valerie's car and her keys by throwing them into a river, intending to make it harder for the police to locate the vehicle. He also revealed a chilling detail. After strangling Valerie with his belt, he just put it back on and continued wearing it as if nothing had happened. The victim's parents were devastated to learn that their neighbor and friend was her killer. They admitted that they had never truly believed Patrick was involved, despite his strange behavior. It's important to note that detectives had kept most of the information from the parents to avoid compromising the investigation. So many details only came to light after Patrick's arrest. When Patrick was placed in jail awaiting trial and was appointed a lawyer, he didn't attempt to retract his confession, as is often the case. Instead, he and his lawyer negotiated a plea deal. Patrick would plead guilty to the murder, and in exchange, the charges of giving false information, for which he was originally arrested, would be dropped. Thanks to this deal, Patrick stood before the judge on March 11, 2024, just a few months after his arrest, and was sentenced to 57 years in prison. While the victim's family didn't have to endure years of waiting for the trial and the defense's attempts to justify Patrick's actions, the plea deal came with a significant drawback. Typically, such agreements don't require the guilty party to disclose all the details of their crime. Patrick only needed to admit his guilt in the murder. Because of this, Valerie's parents may never know the real reasons behind the crime, even if the investigator's theory seems closest to the truth. As for Patrick's family, they too were horrified when the police discovered Valerie's body on their property. His wife and children, including his daughter who had been friends with the victim, had lived just yards away from her remains for nearly 6 months, completely unaware. The plea deal also means we may never learn what was on the tapes that Patrick buried in the second coffin alongside Valerie. It's possible their content could have brought additional trouble or even criminal charges, and Patrick may have feared that the police would search his home following Valerie's disappearance. The case of Bonnie Craig. Bonnie Craig was born in Calgary, Canada, on March 30th, 1976. Her biological father played a small role in her upbringing, as Bonnie and her older brother Jason were lovingly raised by their stepfather, Gary Campbell. Gary treated Bonnie and Jason as his own children. When Bonnie was 5 years old, Gary and her mother Karen had a son named Adam. 2 years later, a younger sister named Samantha was born, and she quickly became Bonnie's close companion. Bonnie loved to dress Samantha in fairy tale costumes and teach her everything Bonnie had learned. Gary, the head of the family, worked in the oil industry, which required him to move frequently to different locations. As a result, Bonnie was used to changing schools, having attended 6 elementary schools and 2 high schools, which taught her to adapt to new environments and make friends easily. During her childhood, Bonnie lived in a variety of climates, from sunny California with its outdoor pool to snowy Anchorage, West Texas, and finally back to the beautiful landscapes of Alaska. However, Karen and Gary's sudden divorce marked a significant change for the children. Samantha and Adam began alternating between their parents' homes. Bonnie focused on her studies and various extracurricular activities, including swimming, diving, horseback riding, writing poetry, and playing the violin and viola in the school orchestra. However, life continued to present her with unforeseen challenges. While she was trying to come to terms with her parents' divorce, tragedy struck when her best friend died in a drunk driving accident, a tragedy that profoundly changed Bonnie's outlook on life. She pledged to abstain from drinking and driving, and she was so concerned about the risks of driving that she decided not to get a driver's license for fear of getting into an accident. Instead, she chose to walk or take public transportation to raise awareness about the dangers of drunk driving. After graduating from high school, Bonnie moved to Anchorage to study psychology at the University of Alaska. At the same time, her boyfriend, Cameron Miyazaki, was studying architecture at the University of California at Berkeley. Despite the physical distance, they kept in touch by phone and exchanged emails regularly. Bonnie's home life became crowded as her mother began a new relationship with Jim Foster, who brought her 3 children with him. In search of more independence, Bonnie decided to move in with her stepfather. The move was strategic, as it put her only a 15-minute drive from college. Keeping her vow, she took public transportation to class 3 times a week, enjoying brisk walks to the bus stop under the clear blue Alaskan sky. She also balanced her studies with a part-time job at Sam's Club. Her life was filled with purpose, ideals, and passion. On the morning of September 28, 1994, Bonnie left her stepfather's house and headed to the bus stop to attend college classes. That day, a student at the University of Anchorage was taking scenic photos on a hiking trail in Chugach State Park, about 15 miles from Bonnie's house. The park was especially beautiful at this time of year due to Alaska's mild temperatures, long daylight hours, and beautiful scenery. As the student adjusted her camera lens, she noticed something unusual in the water near the cliff's edge, a striking blue object. Upon closer inspection, she discovered a heartbreaking sight: a woman floating face down in shallow water. She immediately called the police to report the incident. The McHugh Creek section is difficult to access except from the cliff top or along the stream for miles, suggesting a tragic accident. Initially, police believe the victim may have slipped and fallen from the cliff top, resulting in her death. This accidental theory was the first conclusion investigators reached. It is believed that the victim, attracted by the peaceful atmosphere of the park, may have lost her balance and fallen tragically. The body was then transferred to the medical examiner's office, where an autopsy was performed to determine the cause of injuries and assist in identifying the victim. The autopsy revealed that the young woman died from drowning and severe head trauma, likely caused by a fall from the cliff. A unique class ring, often worn by graduating students, helped police identify the victim as Bonnie Craig. To confirm their findings, police contacted Bonnie's family. Karen, Bonnie's mother, is on a short trip to a coastal town to attend a relative's wedding with her husband, Jim, who spent his childhood there. The trip is significant because Karen will meet Jim's parents for the first time. Karen is having a wonderful time with her future in-laws, laughing and sharing stories. But she has no idea that tragedy has struck her beloved daughter, Bonnie. A knock on the cruise ship's door at 3 a.m. shatters the peaceful atmosphere. When faced with the heartbreaking news, Karen initially refuses to believe it, thinking it's a cruel joke. It's unthinkable that her responsible daughter would be alone in the park instead of attending college classes. The news of Bonnie's death from the police has left Karen devastated. Karen has spent the past 3 years working undercover for the Anchorage Police Department. After graduating from the police academy, she specialized in drug trafficking cases. Her colleagues deeply respected her problem-solving skills, which she had developed over years of dedication to her job. However, Karen's dedication extended beyond her work to her family. Her undercover work often required a difficult balance between her 2 roles. Karen instinctively questioned the initial ruling that Bonnie's death was an accident, and her priority was to turn the investigation over to her own department. Believing that there was more to her daughter's tragic death, she asked the police for detailed information about the circumstances surrounding the incident, including whether Bonnie had shown any signs of sexual violence. However, the police noted that Bonnie had been found fully clothed. Karen knew that a more thorough investigation was needed. Her daughter, Bonnie, was responsible and trustworthy, always kept her promises, and she didn't even have a driver's license. so it was difficult to understand why she was alone and miles away from home during school hours. What further confused Karen was that Bonnie's personal belongings were not at the scene, which made her suspect that the police force might be inclined to rush to classify the incident as an unfortunate accident. Karen was determined to continue her search for the truth. Karen returned to Alaska on the earliest flight possible to formally identify the body, holding out hope that the deceased might not be her daughter, Bonnie. Entering the morgue, she hesitantly approached the ambulance where the body was covered with a white sheet. When she pulled the sheet away and saw the face, her worst fears came true. It was indeed her daughter, Bonnie, resting in eternal peace. Karen's instincts as a grieving mother and a law enforcement officer told her that her daughter's death was more than just an accident. As she held her daughter's hand, she saw bruises and swelling on her knuckles, which she assumed were defensive wounds. Karen wanted the police to record this evidence, believing it could be crucial in finding clues before her daughter was buried. The police were skeptical, thinking the injuries could have been caused by a fall. Despite the police's skepticism, Karen decided to take a different approach in her quest for justice. Karen reached out to her media contact. The shocking news of a young college student's death in a creek quickly garnered widespread attention from the local media. Attempted to contact her superiors, hoping for assistance as precious time was running out, but was told the matter was beyond their scope. The next day, Karen, Jim, Gary, Jason, Adam, and Samantha gathered at the funeral home to say their final goodbyes to Bonnie. It was difficult for her siblings to see her lying motionless, knowing how full of life she had once been. As they prepared for the funeral, they had to choose a casket. Karen, wanting to keep any potential evidence safe, decided on a stone crypt, thinking that it might need to be reopened in the future if new information came to light. Although she tried to seek help and attention from the media, her efforts seemed to complicate things rather than help uncover the truth. Karen was summoned to the police station and asked not to publicly call the incident a crime so as not to affect the ongoing investigation. The police were carefully reviewing all possible leads and were considering Gary Campbell, Bonnie's stepfather, as a potential suspect. They suspect him because his alibi doesn't quite add up and there are reports of conflict between him and Bonnie. This information leaves Karen stunned as she finds it hard to believe that Gary, who has always been Bonnie's loving father, could be involved in such a terrible thing. The situation worsens when Karen goes to Gary's house to collect her daughter's belongings, but finds Bonnie's room locked. An argument breaks out when Gary accuses Karen of stealing a photo of Bonnie that she took without his permission. He insists on keeping the memories of the girl he cherishes. Bonnie's death has a profound effect on her younger sister Samantha, who was only 12 when the tragedy occurred. Samantha begins to struggle in school and finds it difficult to concentrate at home. She often shares everything with Bonnie and feels completely lost without her guidance. The confusion that arose from her sister's death even caused her to doubt her own trust in her father, leaving her uncertain about what was right. One evening, as her father, Gary, was tucking her in for bed, fear filled her eyes as she asked if he was responsible for Bonnie's death. Gary was surprised and hurt by her question. He regained his composure and gently reassured Samantha that he would never hurt her sister. His comforting words helped her to ease her fears and trust him again. After Bonnie's death, the police spoke to Adam and Samantha, both of whom confirmed that their father, Gary, had been home the day Bonnie died, only leaving for work after Bonnie had left the house. His alibi was confirmed by co-workers and supervisors, clearing any doubts about him. An autopsy revealed that Bonnie had died several hours before her body was found. The cause of death was determined to be drowning, and she also suffered severe head injuries that may have been caused by falling from a cliff or being struck by a heavy object. The police began a thorough investigation into Bonnie's death, which was initially ruled an accident at the park. A police officer carefully searched the area near the cliff and found a leaf with a drop of Bonnie's blood a few feet from the edge of the cliff. This prompted an investigation into the presence of blood. If her injuries were caused by a fall, the discovery led the police to consider that Bonnie's fall may not have been an accident, but rather the result of someone else's actions. The police were aware that solving this case would be difficult and would require them to proceed with caution. Therefore, they chose not to notify the relevant parties at this time. Family members suspected that a crime had occurred, and the police deliberately withheld all information about the case to avoid alerting potential perpetrators. They could not escape the feeling that the killer could be someone close to Bonnie. This made Karen's sudden media release a hindrance to the investigation. Bonnie Craig's funeral was filled with loved ones, including friends, family, and acquaintances, as well as her boyfriend, who traveled from California to say goodbye. He was deeply saddened, as he could never have imagined such a tragic ending to their story. Even Bonnie's biological father, Gordon Craig, who had not played an active role in her life, attended the funeral to pay his respects and say goodbye to her. The funeral took place at a church that Bonnie occasionally visited. It was a moment for everyone who knew Bonnie to pay their last respects, share fond memories of her, and support each other during this difficult time. A week after Bonnie's death, Karen decided to investigate her daughter's case herself. Since the police had not provided any updates, carefully traced Bonnie's pre-dawn route from Gary's house to try to understand what might have been going through her daughter's mind that morning. She wanted to put herself in Bonnie's shoes and imagine what details might have caught her attention. As Karen walked along the path her daughter had walked many times that week, she began to realize how dangerous it was. The path was surrounded by tall trees that seemed to loom in the shadows, hiding potential dangers. Karen wondered why Bonnie didn't ask her stepfather to drive her to the bus stop and why she never mentioned the dangerous path she had walked every day. She later learned that Bonnie felt the same way, not wanting to worry anyone and wanting to be independent. Bonnie was prepared and carried pepper spray, believing that she could protect herself if necessary. Karen had also taught Bonnie from a young age never to hitchhike with strangers, believing that her daughter would only hitchhike with someone she knew and trusted. When the walk yielded no clues, Karen drove around the area, looking for any of Bonnie's belongings that might provide clues to the investigation. Unfortunately, she found nothing. In January 1995, Karen contacted the sergeant in charge of Bonnie's case directly to ask if her daughter had been sexually assaulted. The sergeant was forced to tell her the truth. Karen was allowed to see the results of Bonnie's autopsy on the condition that they remained strictly confidential. The autopsy revealed that Bonnie's body was fully clothed, but she had injuries to her genitals and male DNA was recovered from a swab. This information must be kept confidential because the source of the DNA is still unknown. During the investigation, all the men associated with Bonnie were questioned and their DNA samples were collected. However, no matches were found at that time. Although several witnesses saw Bonnie walking to the bus stop that morning, none of them saw her actually get on the bus. The question of how Bonnie ended up in Chugach Park, more than 10 miles from her home, remains unanswered. Investigators speculate that she may have been attacked while walking alone in the dark. A few months after Bonnie's death, Jim's family invited Jim and Karen on a week-long cruise, hoping that a change of scenery would help them heal. Karen was hesitant at first, as the cruise reminded her of her daughter's tragic death. However, she realized that the trip could be a chance to temporarily escape her grief. For the past year, Karen had been consumed by grief, the investigation, and waiting for news of her daughter. She saw the trip as a chance to temporarily escape her worries. Karen, Jim, Jim's brother Ken, and Ken's wife spent the week enjoying the sights and sounds of the ocean. When they returned to the dock, they received word from the Coast Guard that their family had attempted to contact them about an emergency. Karen immediately became concerned that it might be about one of her children. However, this time the bad news was about Jim and Ken's father, who had suddenly died of a heart attack. The news was especially shocking because the family had just celebrated their father's 63rd birthday when he had seemed healthy and happy. Unfortunately, this was the second time the family had received heartbreaking news after returning from a boat trip. Karen's remaining children had a hard time coping with the loss of their sister Bonnie and the impact of their mother's relentless pursuit of justice. As the investigation into Bonnie's death became the focus, the children often felt neglected and deprived of the care they needed. Karen struggled with the moral dilemma of balancing her love for her children with her commitment to seeking justice for Bonnie's death, despite the possibility that the case would never be solved. Over time, Karen's children grew up and started families of their own, bringing her immense joy as a grandmother. Amidst these life changes, Her youngest son, Adam, underwent a cornea transplant to improve his increasingly poor eyesight, which unfortunately resulted in blindness in one eye. Karen's personal life went through many changes. She married Jim, but unfortunately their marriage ended in divorce after 3 years. The family faced more difficult times, including the loss of Karen's brother and mother, who battled cancer. Throughout the ups and downs, the sadness and grief of losing Bonnie continued to have a lasting impact on Karen's life. The family experienced a great deal of emotional pain, including sleepless nights, anxiety, anger, and deep depression. On January 5, 2007, 12 years after Bonnie's death, Karen set off on a round-the-world trip with a friend. While staying on an island in the Philippines, Karen received an unexpected email from an unknown sender with the subject line Bonnie. The sudden message made her heart pound as the case, which had been unsolved for years, had recently gained new momentum. A new team of investigators using an advanced database retested the DNA evidence found on Bonnie. Their efforts led to a breakthrough. They matched the DNA to a man serving a sentence in New Hampshire for a series of armed robberies. Kenneth Dion was born in 1969. He was 25 years old when Bonnie died. He only became a suspect in the case after his DNA was added to the system in late 2006. With a martial arts background and a track record of competition, Kenneth served in the United States Army. However, his time in the U.S. Army was cut short due to his drug use. Kenneth had a particular habit of carrying unusual items in his car, including a 3-pronged stick and nunchucks. Kenneth Dion had only recently been released from prison after a brief period of freedom in May 2007. Kenneth was charged with assault and murder in connection with Bonnie's death. According to the indictment, Kenneth attacked Bonnie as she walked to the bus stop using weapons and martial arts to sexually assault her. And then, to conceal evidence of his crimes, he dumped her body off a cliff in the park. As more information became available about Kenneth, it was discovered that he had a lengthy criminal record with 18 convictions, including 10 misdemeanors and 8 felonies. Had Kenneth's DNA been in the database sooner, the case might have been solved more quickly. Kenneth Dion was sentenced to 124 years in prison on October 31, 2011, 17 years after the incident. He received 99 years for murder and 25 years for assault. He is eligible for parole at age 80. Melissa Brannon was born on April 12, 1984 in Texas. Not long after, her parents divorced and her mom decided to move to a small town called Lorton, Virginia. It was a quiet, peaceful place popular among families with kids. Melissa's mom, Tammy, got a job as an accountant at a local company and rented an apartment in a residential complex on the outskirts of town. The complex was made up of small apartment buildings. And one of the best things about it was all the regular events and activities organized for the residents and their kids. These events happen every Friday and on holidays, giving everyone a chance to get to know each other, creating a close-knit, friendly community. Melissa liked the place. She was 5 years old when they moved, and she spent most of her time playing outside with the other kids. She also loved taking part in the events because there were always plenty of fun and delicious food. On December 3rd, Complex held a Christmas event in a separate building with several halls. About 200 residents attended, enjoying dinner in small groups while their kids ran around having fun. Around 10 p.m., decided it was time to go home. She called for Melissa and asked her to grab their jackets while she said goodbye to some friends. Melissa also asked if she could take some chips home, and her mom agreed. A few minutes later, when Tammy had finished her goodbyes, she noticed Melissa still hadn't returned. She began checking every hall and even peeked into the hallway, but there was no sign of her daughter. Worried, she started asking the other guests if they'd seen Melissa, but no one had. With each passing minute, Tammy's concern grew, and soon word spread among the neighbors that Melissa had gone missing. Many people began helping Tammy search. They looked through the building, checked outside, but Melissa was nowhere to be found. Finally, Tammy decided to call the police. Within minutes, officers arrived at the complex. They immediately joined the search, combing through the entire area. By that time, even more neighbors had heard about Melissa's disappearance, and over 300 volunteers were now helping look for her. The police initially thought that Melissa might have wandered outside and gotten lost, but as the search went on, this theory seemed less and less likely. It was cold and dark outside, making it unlikely that a young girl could have gone far. Plus, Melissa was familiar with the complex, even at her age, so the officers doubted she would have wandered off in a completely different direction. What made the situation even more difficult was the fact that there was a large forest right behind the complex, so it was possible that Melissa had somehow ended up there and gotten lost. The search of the building where the Christmas event was held didn't yield many results. Melissa's jacket was missing, but there were no other clues to explain her disappearance. The only thing that stood out to the police was an open window in the boiler room. They considered the possibility that she might have climbed out through it, but even that didn't seem very likely. After failing to find Melissa, the police began interviewing everyone who had attended the event. None of the neighbors recalled seeing her leave the building or anyone taking her outside. Melissa's mom didn't notice anything strange that evening either. The officers also asked if she'd had any issues with anyone in the complex or noticed anything odd, but Tammy assured them that she got along well with everyone and there had never been any signs of trouble. The police considered the possibility that Melissa's father could have taken her, as this is a common scenario in such cases, but they were able to confirm that he was in Texas and couldn't have been in another state at the time. With no other leads, the police decided to expand their search. Some officers headed into the forest behind the complex, while others continued checking the remaining buildings. Even though it was late into the night, hundreds of residents stayed out to help the police search for the missing girl. Unfortunately, the search led to nothing. There were no signs of Melissa in the forest or any of the numerous buildings in the complex. At that point, the police sent the volunteers home and decided to go door to door, speaking to every resident. Around 400 people lived there, and that night, officers talked to each one of them. No one had any idea where Melissa could have gone, so investigators asked them to think back on anything strange or suspicious that had happened around the complex, even if it didn't seem related to her disappearance. That's when they got their first interesting lead. Several women mentioned that Caleb Hughes, one of the complex's maintenance workers, had been acting inappropriately that night. He tried to flirt with them and made some very lewd comments, even though most of them were with their husbands. Hughes, who was 23 at the time, had also raised red flags with parents. Many of them noticed that he seemed to be paying an unusual amount of attention to their children during the evening. Hearing all these complaints, the police went back to Tammy and asked if she had noticed anything odd about Hughes. Tammy recalled that during the event, he had approached her several times to strike up a conversation about her daughter. At one point, he even offered to take Melissa to the restroom so Tammy wouldn't have to leave the party. All of this seemed suspicious to the investigators, so they decided to talk to Hughes. However, he was nowhere to be found, so the officers headed to his home. Hughes lived just a few miles from the complex, but when the police knocked on his door, he wasn't there either. Instead, his wife answered and told them that he hadn't come home that evening. The police left but returned a few hours later. By then, Hughes was back and said he had arrived home around 12:30 a.m. The officers quickly realized that Hughes had left the complex about 2.5 hours before returning home, which was odd since his commute should only have taken about 10 minutes. Hughes claimed that he had taken a longer route to stop at a store for a pack of beer, but the police were skeptical of his story. First, a quick stop still wouldn't account for nearly 3 hours. And second, there was a state law prohibiting alcohol sales after midnight. On top of that, Hughes couldn't provide a receipt for his purchase. The situation looked pretty suspicious, so the police asked Hughes to hand over the clothes he had worn to work that day. This is when things got even stranger. Hughes said that he had thrown his clothes into the washing machine as soon as he got home. Despite this, the officers convinced him to give them the clothing. To their surprise, they found that he had also washed his shoes. But that wasn't all. Parts of the soles had been cut off, and along with the clothes, there was a large knife sheath and a leather belt in the washing machine. The police asked where the knife was, but Hughes claimed he couldn't remember. With all of this suspicious behavior, the investigators began to seriously suspect Hughes' involvement in Melissa's disappearance. They took his clothes and brought them to the lab. When forensic experts applied luminol to his shoes, the chemical revealed traces of blood on them. But because he had already washed it, there wasn't enough left for a proper DNA sample, making it impossible to analyze. Detectives returned to Hughes' home and brought him in for questioning. During the long hours of interrogation, Hughes stuck to his story despite all the inconsistencies and suspicious evidence. He also claimed that he had no idea who Melissa was, what she looked like, or what had happened to her. The police knew he was lying since multiple witnesses, including Tammy, had seen him playing with Melissa and other children that evening. But when the detectives confronted him with that and said, "We know you're lying," Hughes calmly responded, "Prove it." Despite the detectives' suspicions, they didn't have enough solid evidence to arrest him, so Hughes was released. The next day, investigators ramped up the search operation, hoping to find either Melissa or more clues. That morning, they also decided to speak with Hughes' wife without him present, and she shared an interesting observation. Apparently, their relationship had been troubled, and she didn't trust him. Before Hughes left for the Christmas event, she checked the mileage on his car and remembered the reading. After he returned, she checked it again and noticed that he had driven 12 miles. This information was crucial for the police for two reasons. First, it didn't align with his story about a trip to the store that supposedly took 2.5 hours. Second, they could now estimate the general area where Hughes might have taken Melissa. By subtracting the distance from his home to the complex, could map out a search area based on the remaining mileage. This led them to an area covering roughly 25 square miles. To cover such a large space, the police enlisted the help of the military, called in helicopters and planes, and even brought in divers to search local bodies of water. Around 400 volunteers also joined the search. Melissa's father, who had flown in from Texas immediately after her disappearance, also took part. The police printed thousands of flyers with information about Melissa's disappearance, hoping to reach as many people as possible. It's worth noting that just 5 months before Melissa went missing, another young girl had disappeared from the same town. Her body was later found, but the police hadn't been able to identify the killer. While the large-scale search was underway, a team of forensic experts were sent to the complex. As we remember, the only potential lead the police had initially found was the open window in the boiler room. The experts examined the area and discovered something interesting. Just outside the window, there was a faint adult-sized boot print, and similar prints led all the way to the parking lot. There were no children's footprints, suggesting that the abductor had likely carried Melissa and placed her in a vehicle. The police had already searched Hughes' car but hadn't found anything useful. At this point, the FBI got involved. They still didn't have enough evidence to arrest Hughes, so they placed him under 24-hour surveillance. A judge also ordered him to provide a DNA sample in case any new evidence surfaced. As investigators dug into Hughes' background, they uncovered a troubling history. He had multiple arrests dating back to his teenage years. He also had a history of alcohol and substance abuse and had been suspected several times of inappropriate behavior towards minors. Further investigation revealed that a few years before the incident, had received a suspended sentence for stealing a car in a neighboring county. When the detectives looked deeper, they found that he had violated his probation, leading the judge to convert his suspended sentence into actual jail time. This gave the investigators a way to put Hughes behind bars, even if it was for a lesser crime. In the following weeks, the search for Melissa continued, but it was fruitless. The terrain made things even more difficult. Most of the area was covered in dense forests with a large river running through it. Then, about 2 months after Melissa's disappearance, something unexpected happened. An unidentified man called Tammy, claiming he had Melissa and demanded a ransom of $75,000. Tammy immediately informed the police, and the FBI agents advised her to gather the money and meet the caller. They quickly set everything up, placing dozens of agents around the area, and began waiting for the supposed kidnapper to show up. Before long, 2 men approached Tammy, and the FBI agents swiftly arrested them. It turned out these men had no connection to Melissa's disappearance. They were just 2 local university students who had seen the news about the missing girl and thought they could make some easy money. Instead, they earned themselves prison sentences. One was sentenced to 7.5 years, and the other received nearly 4 years behind bars. Once again, the investigators found themselves at a dead end. They had a prime suspect, but no solid evidence and no sign of Melissa. In a move to break the case, the detectives decided to re-examine Hughes' car more thoroughly using advanced forensic tools from the FBI. But there was a catch. The car belonged to his wife, so they needed her permission. Fortunately, she immediately agreed, and the forensic team began their work. First, they applied luminol, which revealed traces of blood on the driver's seat mat, pedals, steering wheel, and windshield. This deepened their suspicions of Hughes, but once again, they were unable to extract a usable DNA sample from the blood. Next, the experts decided to search the car for hair, fibers, and other potential clues. But they faced another significant challenge. The car was a mess. The interior was covered in dirt, trash, and dog hair, making it difficult to identify useful evidence amidst the chaos. One of the experts came up with a plan to collect evidence manually using tape. He meticulously went over all the surfaces in the car, then sent the collected materials to the FBI's forensic lab. At first, they found mostly dog hair, which was irrelevant since Hughes and his wife owned 2 large dogs. But then, the forensic experts noticed a different type of hair, dyed black rabbit fur. He soon learned this was the same material used in the coat belonging to Melissa's mother, Tammy. To confirm the match, the experts requested Tammy's coat and verified that the rabbit fur was identical. Investigators theorized that the fur could have transferred to Melissa's clothing when she went to retrieve their coats or in other situations, as Tammy frequently wore the coat during winter and Melissa was always near her mother. In addition to the fur, the experts found a single light-colored hair that matched strands from Melissa's hairbrush. But the most significant clue was still to come. Numerous small red and blue fibers were found on the car's passenger seat. Since Melissa had been wearing a red and blue sweater and skirt on the night she disappeared, investigators needed to track down those exact clothing items to confirm the connection. They spoke with Melissa's grandmother, who had bought the outfit for her, but she couldn't recall the specific store. The police scoured local shops in an attempt to find matching clothes, but came up empty-handed. The forensic expert kept pondering how to prove the fiber's similarity to Melissa's outfit. One evening, while discussing this dilemma with his wife, she asked him to describe the clothing. After hearing his description, she suggested that the items might have been sold at JCPenney, a major retail chain where she often shopped for their children. She even had a collection of JCPenney's catalogs from over the years. She decided to help and began searching through those catalogs, looking for similar clothing. A while later, as she flipped through a Christmas catalog from the previous year, she found what they were looking for. On page 11 was an outfit identical to the one Melissa had been wearing when she disappeared. The breakthrough allowed the investigators to establish a stronger link between Hughes' car and Melissa, as the fibers matched the clothes in the catalog. The FBI immediately contacted the company. They faced another setback. The outfit in question had completely sold out. However, the company offered a potential solution. Since the outfit was sold exclusively through catalogs and only 7,000 sets had been produced, they suggested providing the investigators with a list of all the buyers so the police could track down one of the outfits. The investigators began combing through the list, a task that took quite some time. Eventually, they caught a break. They found a man in Kentucky who had purchased the outfit for his granddaughter but had gotten the size wrong. As a result, the clothes had remained untouched in their original packaging for an entire year. For the investigators, this was the perfect option. The man agreed to send the outfit to the FBI and the forensic team got to work. This particular model had a unique feature. The manufacturer had created a custom shade of dark blue, coded 887, which was patented and hadn't been used in any other clothing line. After comparing the fibers from this outfit, the experts concluded that they were an exact match to the fibers found in Hughes' car. This provided compelling evidence that one of the 7,000 children who had been bought this outfit had been in his vehicle. Although it didn't definitely prove that Hughes had abducted Melissa, the odds of another child wearing this rare outfit being in his car were astronomically low. As a final step, the expert conducted an additional test. He collected over 100 similar colored fibers from various types of clothing and performed 7,983 tests to compare them with the fibers from Hughes' car. The results showed minimal differences across all the fibers, except for two types. The set from the store and the fibers from Hughes' passenger seat were 100% match. This eliminated any doubt that someone else wearing similar clothes could have been in Hughes' car. It had to be the exact outfit that Melissa was wearing. Despite this, the detectives still faced a difficult situation. They knew that the fiber evidence, while strong, was circumstantial, even combined with the blood on Hughes' boots in his car and other clues they had gathered. But with nothing else to go on, they decided to formally charge Hughes with Melissa's abduction. The prosecution argued that Melissa was likely dead based on the blood evidence. The fibers from her clothing found on the passenger seat of Hughes' car suggested that he might have forced her to remove her jacket, pointing to a possible motive. According to their theory, Hughes approached Melissa when she went to get the jackets at her mother's request. He then lured her into the boiler room under some pretext, carried her out through the window, and took her to his vehicle. After taking Melissa to an unknown location and presumably killing her, likely with a knife, Hughes disposed of the weapon and hid the body. This would explain his prolonged absence. Following the crime, Hughes attempted to clean the blood from his car and clothing, even going so far as to cut parts of his shoe soles that had been heavily stained. In a final effort, the police decided to conduct a polygraph test, hoping that, combined with all the other evidence, Hughes might finally confess. The state law required either the discovery of the victim's body or the identification of the exact location of the murder to file a murder charge. Since the penalty for kidnapping was significantly less severe, the investigators hoped that Hughes might confess. The polygraph results showed that Hughes provided deceptive answers to almost all key questions, but he still maintained his innocence. With no other options, the detectives had no choice but to proceed with charges of kidnapping. The trial began over 2 years after Melissa disappeared, and Hughes maintained his innocence. His defense attorney tried to challenge the circumstantial evidence, but the prosecution's argument had a much stronger impact on the jury. After 8 hours of deliberation, they found Hughes guilty, and he was sentenced to the maximum penalty, 50 years in prison. Since then, Hughes has remained behind bars, continuing to deny any involvement in Melissa's disappearance. The police made several more attempts to find her body, but none were successful. For years after the trial, an energy company worker discovered red fabric fragments in a lake within the search area. Divers were sent to investigate, but they also failed to locate Melissa. 8 years after her disappearance, her mother remarried and raised 4 stepchildren with her new husband. Although she took his surname, she continued to use her previous one everywhere, in case Melissa was still alive and trying to find her. As for Hughes, his story didn't end there. On August 2, 2019, he was released early for good behavior, having served just over half of his sentence. At the time of his release, he was 53 years old and has been free for several years now. Melissa is still listed as missing since her murder was never proven. However, very few people believe she could still be alive. After all these years. The case of Allison Bonilla. Allison Pamela Bonilla Vasquez was born on November 7, 2001, in Cartago, Costa Rica. She is an only child living with her mother, Yendri Vasquez. In addition to her mother, her grandparents, Ramon and Marjorie, and her aunt, Samara, also helped raise Allison. Allison's father left the family shortly after her birth. He chose to be with another woman who was pregnant. He did not want to play a role in Allison's life. Only once, when he was diagnosed with lung cancer, did he ask to see his daughter, and Yendri allowed him to. It is worth noting that his second family did not know about Allison's existence. Allison and her mother, Yendri, had a particularly close relationship. For Allison, Yendri was not only a mother, but also a father. Therefore, Allison often gave her mother gifts on Father's Day. Their relationship went beyond the typical mother-daughter relationship. Allison felt comfortable sharing everything with Yendri without fear of being misunderstood or judged. Despite not having a father, Allison did not feel lonely or abandoned. She had a large family and enjoyed spending time with them. She also attended church regularly every Sunday. Relatives described Allison as a kind, outgoing, and friendly girl. In photos, she always looked happy, and there was no sign of sadness or longing in her eyes. Allison had always dreamed of becoming a model. She decided to drop out of 8th grade to focus on makeup classes, thinking that combining the two was too difficult. She did not want to waste time on something that would not help her achieve her goals. After that, Allison started looking for a job to help her mother pay the bills, but did not receive any responses from the places she applied. This made her very sad. Her mother, Yendrai, realized that her daughter would have difficulty finding a job due to her limited education, so she encouraged Allison to take evening classes. At age 18, Allison enrolled in Liceo Enrique Geyer, a few miles from home. During this time, she completed a pastry course and began practicing. Allison made delicious cakes and desserts that were loved by everyone in the neighborhood. This helped her find a way to make money from her baking talent. Allison had a boyfriend named Harold Surisolano who lived in Cochi, a district in the province of Cartago, Costa Rica. Usually, Allison stayed home with her mother in the morning, then met Harold, and then went to evening school at 6 o'clock. She often returned home late by bus. The route from the bus stop to her house was dangerous, dark, and deserted. Therefore, Allison always informed her mother of her location, and sometimes her mother picked her up at the bus stop or halfway. On March 4, 2020, Allison went to her mother's nail salon, then visited her classmate pal for about 15 minutes. They arrived at school at 6 p.m. and separated because they had different classes. Allison arrived at school and waited in an empty classroom for about 15 minutes before realizing that her classes had been canceled for the day. Instead of going home right away, she decided to visit her aunt who lived near the school. However, her aunt was not home. Allison then decided to go to her boyfriend Harold's house. When she arrived, she learned that Harold was at work but would be back soon. Harold's mother invited Allison inside to wait. When Harold returned, the family had dinner together, talking about a variety of topics and discussing future plans. After dinner, Harold excused himself for a moment, saying that he had urgent business to attend to but would be back soon. At 8:15 p.m., Allison left Harold's house without waiting for him to return. This set off a chain of events that would become nationally known. Harold returned home about 5 minutes later and, seeing that Allison had left, texted her to ask where she was and offered to give her a ride home on his bike. Allison replied immediately that she had already arrived at the bus stop. While waiting for the bus, she texted her friend, Pa, to ask if Pa's cousin could give her a ride home on his bike. However, Pa's cousin refused because his bike was a special type and not suitable for two people. It is unclear why Allison did not ask her boyfriend for help. She may have been angry with him or did not want to bother him. Allison got off the bus at 8:43 p.m. Her house was about a mile away. Feeling anxious and scared, she texted her mother to pick her up. At 8:45 p.m., Allison texted her boyfriend and mother that two suspicious men had gotten out of a car and were following her. She decided to run home to avoid them. The road Allison was on was dangerous, poorly lit, and had few people. There was only one security camera there, which captured a blurry image that could have been Allison. Allison's mother, Yendrai, went to the bridge half a mile from their home to pick up her daughter but did not see her. She tried to stay calm, thinking that Allison might have gone back to the bus stop for safety. However, she did not find her there either. She finally thought that Allison had not seen her and had gone home on her own. When Yendrai returned home, she found that Allison was not there. She immediately called relatives and friends to ask for help in the search. About 30 minutes later, Harold woke up and received a call from his Aunt Samara saying Allison was missing. He tried to contact Yendrai, but was unsuccessful. 3 hours later, Yendrai reported Allison missing to the police, and the search began. Luckily, Yendrai had the last photo of Allison in the clothes she was wearing. Police checked several locations, from the bus stop to Allison's house, Catsi Lake, and the nearby hydroelectric dam. On March 5, 2020, police found their first clue, Allison's glasses in the grass about a mile from her house. However, Allison seemed to have disappeared without a trace. 8 days later, they discovered Allison's identification on a coffee plantation. This was surprising because they had checked the area several times before. What was even more suspicious was that her ID was placed in such a conspicuous and clean location, as if someone had intentionally placed it there to mislead the investigation or hide something. 15 days after Allison went missing, Yendrai received a call from Allison's father. Instead of showing concern or offering help, he said that Allison was missing because she was too beautiful. Shocked by these insensitive words, Yendrai immediately hung up the phone, unable to believe what she had just heard. For a long time, the family, police, and volunteers continued to search for Allison. Every Sunday, they hung up posters with her picture. One day, they decided to paint messages on the streets, recreating Allison's journey from the intersection to the bridge, where she was believed to have disappeared. They also put up posters on roadside poles to attract the attention of passersby. At the same time, the police received an important clue. A man came to the police station and said that he knew Allison and had seen her on the night she disappeared, according to the man, at around 8:30 p.m. On March 4th, he left his home on his motorbike to pick someone up. On the way, he saw Allison and a burgundy two-door BMW parked next to her. He turned around to check on the situation and realized it was his cousin's BMW. He was 100% sure of this because the car had distinctive bright yellow headlights. Another witness also confirmed to the police that he had seen the same BMW near where Allison went missing that evening. The car belonged to Nelson Sanchez Urania, 28, nicknamed Sukia. Locals called him that because they believed he was a member of a gang in the area. In fact, Nelson and Allison knew each other. Their families had been acquainted for a long time and had lived in the same neighborhood for a while. However, according to Allison's mother, they had only interacted with Nelson a few times. It was just a normal neighborly relationship, not a close friendship. One day, Nelson offered to give Allison and her cousins a ride home. She agreed because it was morning, she was not alone, and she thought Nelson was a good person. On March 2nd, 2020, 2 days before Allison went missing, Nelson contacted her via Facebook. He sent a message asking Allison to answer some questions. On her cousin's advice, Allison agreed to answer them. Next, Nelson asked Allison about her feelings for him. Specifically, he wanted to know if Allison liked him. Allison was confused by Nelson's sudden question, as they were not close and barely knew each other. When Allison asked why, Nelson explained that he did not have a negative opinion of her, but wanted to know if she thought badly of him. Allison reassured Nelson that she did not hate him and that everything was normal between them. Nelson thanked her and said goodbye. Police searched Nelson's home and seized his car, cell phone, and computer. Investigators found shocking images of women being abused on his phone. When they inspected the car, they found that it had been thoroughly cleaned with car polish. However, the front driver's seat carpet and trunk carpet had been removed. Police found hair and blood on the trunk lid and sent samples to a lab for analysis. After examining the exterior of the car, police used a police dog to search for traces. The dog detected possible blood on the 2 front seats and in the trunk. To confirm, the police used a luminol test, a chemical that reacts with hemoglobin in the blood. The results showed that there were many blood stains on the car's interior, despite the owner's efforts to remove them with cleaning products. While waiting for the results from the lab, Nelson remained free but was closely monitored by the police. They monitored his every move to prevent him from leaving the city or the country. Although Yendrai repeatedly requested his arrest, the police did not have enough evidence to do so. Therefore, Nelson continued to live freely without being prosecuted for many months. Yendrai believed that Allison had been kidnapped for ransom. She tried to stay calm and hoped that her daughter was still alive. In preparation for Allison's return, Yendrai kept her daughter's room as it was, not cleaning or rearranging the furniture. She even bought Allison a gift. Yendrai told the press, "I will continue to do so. As long as there is no evidence that she is dead, I still believe that my daughter is alive and will return home." Laboratory test results confirmed that the hair and blood found in Nelson's car belonged to Allison. The police immediately arrested Nelson. Later, his ex-girlfriend told the police that Nelson had never physically abused her, but had put a lot of mental pressure on their relationship. Specifically, he forbade her from contacting her friends and using the internet. According to her, Nelson only wanted to have a sexual relationship with her. His previous boss revealed that he was very irresponsible at work and even stole about $11,000. Additionally, his landlord said an ex-girlfriend had broken up with him because she was tired of paying his debts. She described him as a very spoiled man. After that, Nelson confessed to his crimes against Allison. He said that on the night of Allison's disappearance, he found her walking alone on a deserted road. Taking advantage of the late hour and their acquaintance, Nelson offered to give Allison a ride. She agreed and got into the car without suspicion. However, instead of taking her home, Nelson drove to a remote coffee plantation and forced Allison out of the car. Nelson violently attacked her, knocking off her glasses and leaving her nearly unconscious. He dragged her to a nearby abandoned house, where he raped and brutally beat her. Nelson then tied her hands with cloth and duct tape to the front seat of his car. Finally, he stuffed her into the trunk of the car and drove to a dumpster in San Geronimo, Cache. There, the killer pushed Allison off a cliff into a pile of trash below. He justified his heinous actions by saying that he was under the influence of drugs. He also admitted that he had long been obsessed with Allison, and when he saw her that night, he decided it was his chance to carry out his dark intentions. Surprisingly, Nelson later recanted his initial statement, accusing the police of coercing him into confessing. However, the authorities had enough evidence to charge him despite his denials. The suspect could face a maximum sentence of 35 years in prison. In the early morning of September 4th, a search party went to the San Ono landfill to look for Allison's body. However, because the area was large and difficult to access, finding Allison's remains was an extremely difficult task. Moreover, it had been 6 months since Allison went missing. Just 25 days after Allison confessed, the police discovered a number of important pieces of evidence. They found human bone fragments, including a spine, ribs, part of the pelvis, and a femur. They also found pieces of clothing that Allison was wearing on the day she disappeared, along with a pair of sneakers with studs inside. All of these clues were sent for testing and thorough analysis by the police. Jose Francisco Herrera, the suspect's defense attorney, questioned the authenticity of the evidence because it was found by volunteers, not professional police. He also said that the discovery of the remains coincided with the time his client declared his innocence, which was suspicious. Rodrigo Era, the attorney representing Allison's family, on the other hand, criticized the suspect's change of testimony, saying that it undermined the credibility of the official investigation. On October 5, 2020, experts confirmed that the remains found belonged to Allison. Because only a partial body was found, they were unable to determine the exact cause of death. However, examination of the remains revealed multiple fractures that appeared after death, suggesting she may have fallen from a great height. Her clothes were torn and her sneakers had bite marks, suggesting a possible animal attack. This would explain why the remains were found scattered in different areas of the landfill. Allison's mother, Yendrai, is furious with the police for not listening and acting promptly. She believes that if they had arrested Nelson sooner, he would have confessed and Allison's body would have been found in better condition. This is an irreparable loss for the family. Despite the terrible pain she is enduring, Yendri finds some solace in saying, "My daughter is in a better place now, where no one can hurt her anymore." The trial of Nelson took place on July 19th. Harold, Allison's boyfriend, was a key witness in the case. According to Harold's testimony, on the afternoon of March 4th, 2020, at approximately 6:30 p.m., he returned home and found Allison there with her mother. Harold then left for approximately 5 to 10 minutes. When he returned, he discovered that Allison had left without saying anything. While Allison was on her way home, Harold texted her repeatedly. As soon as she got off the bus, Allison texted Harold to say that 2 men were following her. Concerned for her safety, Harold suggested that she take a taxi and promised to pay for it. However, Allison refused twice and said that she would run home. Harold did not receive any further response from Allison after that text message. According to his explanation, he only informed his mother of the situation. He did not contact Allison's mother, Yen Dry, because his phone battery died. He then fell asleep for about 30 minutes. It was Allison's aunt who called him to inform him that his girlfriend was missing. Since then, he said he has been worried and tried to call Allison several times, but all the calls went to voicemail. He also could not be reached via WhatsApp messages. Harold said he joined the search party for a few days, but then had to stop because he felt unwell and had to go to work. He really wished things had gone differently. If he could go back in time, he would have taken Allison home that night. However, unfortunately, what happened cannot be changed. On August 18, 2021, the court sentenced Nelson to 18 years in prison for taking the life of Allison. He could have received twice the sentence, but the judge pointed out that there was no evidence to confirm that Nelson knew the route and time Allison would return home and that he planned to attack her. Furthermore, due to the condition of Allison's remains, there was no evidence that Nelson forced her to have sex. The story does not end there. Allison's family was not satisfied with the original sentence, arguing that it was not commensurate with the crime. In 2022, they successfully appealed, and the court decided to retry the case. As a result, on September 28, 2023, Nelson was sentenced to 35 years in prison. Allison's family's lawyer emphasized that Nelson acted in a cruel and inhumane manner and took advantage of the trust of the victim and her relatives. The court ruled that Nelson's actions were intentional. Nelson used his long-standing relationship with Allison to commit the crime. The criminal court also took into account Nelson's lack of remorse for his actions. Although still hurt and angry, the victim's family was relieved by the new verdict. The decision ended a painful chapter in their lives that lasted more than 3 years and put an end to this nightmare. Allison's family created a memorial at the spot where her body was found. They placed a cross, flowers, and a small altar with a photo of Allison and a statue of the Virgin Mary. Allison's case has caused a stir in Costa Rican media and social media. It has also led to many marches in memory of Allison and other women who have been victims of similar violence. Thank you for joining us on this journey into the depths of unsolved mysteries. Cold cases not only challenge our understanding of the past, but also ignite our curiosity and determination for answers. Remember to subscribe to stay updated on our latest investigations. And if you have any information regarding the cases we've covered, don't hesitate to reach out. Together, we can shed light on the shadows of the past and bring closure to those who seek it. Until next time, stay vigilant, stay curious, and never stop seeking the truth.